drew a direct equivalence between Palestinian life on the one hand and non-life on the other. With humans and non-humans together fossilized, this was a word used by Joseph White, a Jewish Polish who settled in Palestine in the early 30s and who was in charge of the transfer committees which were set up to deal with the Palestinians, which were, considered the Arab problem. And obviously, in this fossilized context, or the desertified context, the idea that there was a desert, as the famous slogan goes, was a way to make moral and political room for the ongoing settler colonial project. Now, I don't want to speak for too long, but I think it's very important to record this long durée of dehumanization. It has not started the 7th of October. It has started when the settler colonial project started. But what the razing to the ground of Gaza with blatant and shocking disregard for even the minimum rules of international humanitarian law is making clear is that Palestinian humanity and civilian lives are basically of no value or lesser value for the whole of the Western Hemisphere. To conclude, while we mourn and grieve all the innocent victims of this carnage, whether they are Israelis or Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, or Christians, I think we need to pay very careful attention to context and history, and which timeline we choose to adopt for our understanding of the events, of the current events. I think this is the only way, continuing to resist this attack, that we can even begin to imagine the end of violence and the project of safety for all. Thank you very much.
So let me start by saying a couple of words about the petition we launched at the University of Bologna a couple of weeks ago. Luba was rightly reminding the attacks against this petition. But I would like to remind that many people signed the petition, more than expected, more than 600 people working at the University of Bologna in different capacities. I think it is important also to emphasize this aspect, which is not isolated. In Bologna, there were at least 3 huge demonstrations against what is happening in Gaza, demonstrations that were kind of organized and led by young Palestinians and by so-called second generation migrants. I'm sure that even at the feminist demonstration that is going on right now, there will be Palestinian flags. And this says something, about what Mark was saying, speaking of the Palestinian struggle as a global struggle. In a way, like Angela Davis was talking about that in the wake of Ferguson in the US. The Palestinian struggle is again, you'd say, a kind of symbolic struggle well beyond its kind of narrow geography. That's an important point. I must say that writing the petition with a bunch of friends and colleagues has been very important for me, because since October 7, I was kind of speechless, which means that it was very difficult for me to find the words, literally, to express what I was kind of feeling in front of the images coming from Israel, coming from Gaza. Sharing, sorrow and pain is an important political move. At least it has been important for me in this as well as in other occasions. So speechless in front of something that is quite difficult to describe with words. I think Ruba has explained very well that what is going on in the rubble under shelling and bombing in Gaza is really an existential struggle, a struggle for existence, which means a very radical struggle in front of plans of ethnic cleansing that are openly, explicitly claimed by Israeli politicians and generals. What is at stake there is really geography, but geography in very dense sense, Latin American feminists speak of cuerpo territorio, body territory, of this kind of intertwining between bodies and territories that make up new geographies of domination, but also geographies of struggle. And this existential struggle of Palestinians today is of course also important from the angle of archives, to pick up the second concept that figures in the title of our panel tonight. While Ruba was talking, what came to my mind is a phrase that was forged by an Indian historian, Ranajit Guha, at the very beginning of what became the project of Indian Subaltern Studies. And this phrase is the prose of counterinsurgency. And what Guha writes in the early 1980s is precisely that every attempt, to inscribe the voice of the colonized within archives has to confront the prose of counterinsurgency. And from this point of view, I really learned a lot from 𝐏𝐚𝐥𝐞𝐬𝐭 intervention, because she was able to describe a whole set of cultural practices of writing, different practices of writing, but also visual practices that have continuously created and multiplied Palestinian archives in the wake of the Nakba. So maybe a question for her, but for the whole panel, for all of us, is what kind of desire of liberation can we read of these archives? These archives produced by a stateless people. You have emphasized this point. And of course, you know, this is a kind of crucial question. A crucial question in a situation in which, I mean, we are kind of haunted by a sense of impossibility. Even beyond the massacre in Gaza and in the West Bank, there is this sense of impossibility. Two-state solution. But what does two-state solution mean today? You know, let's ask this question, because for me it is very difficult to imagine a two-state solution in this situation. You know, and so there is the dream from the river to the sea, the land of the free. Muslims, Christians, Jews, atheists, please don't forget us. You know, it's a dream. It seems possible, but you know, politics has to do with impossible, with impossibility. Politics has to create the conditions, the material conditions that make something impossible possible. A last point that goes back to the global dimension of the Palestinian struggle that was mentioned in a very effective way by Mark. I think this global dimension has different sides. There is the side of struggle that is the most important for us, I should say. But there is also the side of the tumultuous transformations of the world system. Yesterday, as you may know, there was an important virtual meeting of the BRICS, where Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered quite a relevant speech on the conflict in Gaza. So my question again to Mark, but to all of us, is whether it is possible to see the opening of new spaces of possibility once again in a world that is quite different from the kind of unipolar world that was celebrated in the 1990s by theorists of globalization. Thank you.
If I may add, actually, I had the same question for you, but not as articulated as Alessandro developed it, but the sense of change that you all raised, the sense of possibility, and the sense of imagination. You use these words. Open for me, I mean, the window of potentialities. You all know how this word potential history, which is not what if history, is something much stronger and more important in Palestinian and Israeli history too. Actually, in these weeks, I tried to reconcile some archives, namely the photovisual archives of UNRWA, looking for places that are now destroyed, and looking also for people concretely, trying to contact the archivists, for example. But I'm sure all of us know who can't respond now for different reasons, and no one knows where they are, actually, also from the UNRWA staff. And these archives are memory of the war, but it's not simply a label used by UNESCO. It's really, if you have the chance, and they are free, they are open access, you will find people who are, and you will find places and geographies and archives that we are talking about tonight. So which are the potentialities of this moment, where everything seems total despair, catastrophes. It doesn't even the word catastrophe seems not so powerful now. What are the potentialities of change? It's not rhetoric. I'm asking to you because I'm struggling for that. I'm not looking for hope, although hope is all. It's a political term, but where are you looking for that? You gave different ways of approaching this topic, but if you can elaborate more, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Sandra and Chiara. Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you so much both for your remarks and for your insight, and as well as for this question. So I was thinking of a couple ways I want to answer this. The first is I think that there is an argument to be made that a stateless people doing archival counterinsurgent archives is, or insurgent archives, sorry, are always, going to be disaggregated, not necessarily ad hoc, but iterative, constantly in motion, etc. There is, the idea, the binding of the archive with a capital A to the state makes it such that a stateless people must, in any way, rethink what an archive is, but also what it is doing for them, right? So, in that sense, I think that archives are not only embodiment of practices or desires for liberation as such, but also in the way that they work and are organized, are doing two other important things. One, they are collective practices often popular practices. And two, they speak to and gesture towards democratic popular mobilization. The vast majority of Palestinian archival practices are grassroots practices, collective practices, very local art practices, often piecemeal. Even sort of archival collections like I would regard the Palestinian Authority's archives, let's say all of the different ministries, that can in the future become archives of their own about a native agent's or collaborating agent's functions, right, are produced by Palestinians internal to a certain kind of political body, whether I appreciate it or not. Usually I don't. So there's something here I think is really powerful about the desire, these archives and the desire to archive for change. The other thing I would say is I don't see in archives, and this perhaps goes to your question, Chiara, there's a lot, you'll excuse my historian's slight conservatism around the utilization of things like the imaginary, the potentiality, futurity, etc. Because I think they're bound up with slightly, in my worry, idealized relationships to archival recovery. What I'm gesturing here is towards politics. That there is really nothing, that desire will come through and it's forged through the political. And here what I'm most distressed by, less the dehumanization of Palestinians, but actually also and in tandem and often also by people who are in support of Palestinians, their depoliticization, the collapsing of the Palestinian figure to the human or the non-human or the dehuman, and less as a political subject, with political ideas and political understandings, the lack of curiosity around what the multitudes of desires, not just desire, right, and imaginaries and futurities and potentialities of the moment. So it's curious to me often where, you know, the Palestinians even now, we often talk in these kind of very flat ways, as if there are not as many desires as there are Palestinians, and as if there are not spaces where people, against all odds, are trying to build political futures, against all sorts of attempts to confine and to constrain. Yeah, so I'm just thinking really about how do we insist on politics, how we insist on the work of the political at times when during processes of such devastating destruction and dehumanization and just brute force and erasure and elision by, you know, I try not to say the word, you know, by many in the West and elsewhere. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, you both raised so many issues, and Mesna has already replied so eloquently, but I think that Sandra touched upon something that is very dear to me in terms of my research and in terms of the way I think about, and all of you actually, the way in which I think about hope, or where, you know, where do we look for a sense of not even resisting, but existing in the face of such attacks to our own very existence as people. And I think that the first thing first of all, the first thing that I really loved about what Sandra said is that these weeks have given us a sense of community, a sense of a large community. I mean, 600 people who signed this petition knowing they would be attacked, knowing that it would not be easy to put their names, because of the level of violence leveled against the Palestinians and the level of criminalization, I think is already a source of hope. It's quite unprecedented in many ways. However, besides that, I think that as part of the Insaniya, the Palestinian Society for Anthropology for